Issue 139. We start out with Metal Knuckles threatening to destroy the city if he doesn't see Sonic. And the title of the story kinda spoils who built the guy. I was thinking it was the Eggman fanboys at first. Sonic gets smacked by the metal thing he's holding and thrown into the window of a store, which causes the genre-blind civilian to assume Sonic can't win just because of a minor setback. Sonic says, "Buddy, I'm gonna pretend I never heard you say that." Probably to resist just punching him for doubting him. His spin dash harmlessly bounces off the Metallix's chest and hits him with a laser and kicks him and plans to kidnap him. He's brought to Grimer's base 20 minutes later, and Grimer makes a few adjustments to make sure Sonic would stay in a deep, hypnotic sleep. And then he plans to begin a memory scan of him. He talks to Sonic, who's under hypnosis since he doesn't react negatively to it being Grimer, and asks Sonic to remember what happened to Eggman last time he saw him, probably to get his brain thinking about the memory. But Grimer was there when Eggman was turned into a crystal statue right in front of him. Like, how would Grimer know that anything changed, that anything happened after he was turned into a crystal statue? Alright. I guess Grimer went to the Chaos Chamber, getting away with that somehow, and couldn't find Eggman because he had shrunken. So that's why he's doing this? But you'd think that he would just assume he was still a crystal statue. After some recap, Grimer tells Metallix to take Sonic back to Metropolis and tells him to not forget about the fake Metallix wreckage, while pointing out that when Sonic wakes up, he won't remember being here. He wakes up in Metropolis and thinks because of the fake wreckage that he had destroyed Metal Knuckles. Then Sonic says that for some reason Grimer's popped into his head, and he says that one phone call will make sure. He calls the Metropolis City high security prison and asks to speak to the governor. The governor tells Sonic that Grimer's still locked up. Either he's lying, or he's being fooled by an infiltrator doppelganger. Sonic can't shake the feeling that he's missing something, which makes sense considering he'd subconsciously remember hearing his voice. And we see Grimer telling the governor that he lied just fine and revealing that he's taken over the prison. How? Why the fuck is he planning to make Eggman return when he made such a big deal about betraying him for being a terrible boss and wanting to become an independent villain? If Grimer was Eggman's son, or maybe nephew, it'd make more sense that he'd have such an attachment to him that he'd feel guilty about betraying him and be emotionally dependent on him, thinking he needs him back when he doesn't. At least with Snively, it made a little sense, and then the reboot pretended that Snively wasn't even related to Eggman. I hope we actually get to see how Grimer took over the prison in the first place, because that sounds impossible. At least when Snively was in prison, it was realistic instead of treating me like a total idiot, because he just stayed in the cell. In the next story, Amy and Techno are transported to another dimension by the Ring of Eternity, and for some reason some people are already expecting them to know their names. That's because they are transported to 3,000 years in the future in their own dimension, in 5000 AD. Why is there an AD year system? Did Mobius have a G-Buzz too? It's nice to see the future is all good. Is this taking place after Silver's future or before it? Does Silver's bad future try to retcon this? Or is he actually from another dimension and was totally wrong? You'll know what I mean later, much later. Techno was told that their adventures are top sellers in the history chips, and they knew they'd come here one day. History chips? Can't they just have the internet and ebooks? Why would there be any sort of demand for history chips when you could just go look stuff up on the internet? Apparently history chips are edible microchips genetically grown in potatoes, and the more you eat, the more you learn. So that makes sense, because it's much easier to eat something than to go out of your way to Google something and read and try to understand it. I guess they're nanobots that alter your brain so you learn more. I wish reality had that. Then someone drives an invisible car and almost hits them, and a civilian kid says that everyone in the future wears special lens so they can see the cars. Okay, that's stupid and overly convoluted. Why the fuck make them invisible? Why am I expected to believe everyone would be okay with putting contact lenses in their eyes? I wouldn't. That's why I wear glasses. And more importantly, if the guy's driving the car and almost hits some people, it's him who's in the wrong. He basically drove it into the sidewalk instead of staying on the road. There's no way traffic laws would have all disappeared in the future. You know how many deaths that would cause? Then a kid explains that schools closed down centuries ago, and their computerized school caps feed info directly into their brains now. Again, probably with nanobots. Techno says that while she's always dependent on her technical skills, they're outdated here. And Amy reasons that the Ring of Eternity must have sent them here for a reason, as the people who greeted them smirk condescendingly. There's a flash of light, and the power goes down all over the city, causing a flying car to be visible, making someone ashamed when it's not like it has an embarrassing paint job. That's another thing, no one would make all their cars invisible, because then there'd be no point to what color it is. Anyways, people start falling out of the sky because their flying shoes have cut out. And they don't have their own energy source, because I guess it'd be too energy intensive for a battery. Probably the same reason the invisibility is tied to the electricity grid. It turns out the villain was a robot or person in a mecha suit named Gremlin, who's absorbed the city's electricity into his power armor. He taunts that everyone's helpless without it, and he attacks the heroes who go to a museum and hit the guy with something from a catapult since it doesn't require electricity. The obnoxious message of we become too dependent on technology is shoved down our throat once more by someone in the future literally saying it. This comic was made by technology, by the way. And one of the citizens actually apologizes to Techno for laughing at her. You should! She's a hero! Why didn't they all feel sorry for her and Amy instead? They're heroes. In the next story, we see that most Eggman fanboys are weak individuals who follow Eggman out of fear, or rather follow their cult, and are of no threat to society. Predictably, we then see an evil Mobian, a Blue Panther, saying that he has a message for Tails the Fox to challenge him. Wow, the writer actually forgot what his real name is. I'd expect this mistake from someone who doesn't know the series well at all, like Pontac and Grass. Maybe it's intentional and he just doesn't know Tails' name. But even random people know his whole name, don't they? Because he's a famous hero? Doesn't Tails always tend to introduce himself as Miles Tails Prower? The Blue Panther says that if he defeats Tails, people will start to lose faith in heroes, who he calls so-called. And then it'll be easier for Eggman to regain control of Mobius. Why? Wouldn't it not matter what the civilians think, because it'll be the heroes doing all the work against him? That and the militaries. Tails briefly complains that his tails itch, and he gets punched while insulted for turning his back on him. Tails sits down all dazed, and some civilians dismiss his worth instead of feeling bad for him and hoping he's okay. Again. Then after Sleek leaves, Tails says that he only lost because some fleas bit his tails. The fleas are sentient, and it turns out they want equal rights. You mean they don't have it already? Besides, we've seen insect people before, like the insect people that were clearly the size of regular Mobians that Vermin was bullying. And plus we heard about like the anteaters terrorizing the ant farms, and the ants didn't... I don't remember them being this small. But these guys are talking like all insects are this small. One of them also points out that they have relatives in the Special Zone and are smaller than them. Tails says that people will respond better to the insect people if they help to the community. Tails goes into another fight with Sleek, who activates his power gloves as electricity surrounds the outside of their wires, and the ground below him crumbles from the fleas. In the next story, oh, it's just a reprint, never mind. The first story was by Nigel Kitching, and had Grimer get Sonic kidnapped and hypnotized into telling him what happened to Eggman to give him a clue about how to revive him for no reason whatsoever. Seriously, why does he want to do this? He's competent enough to somehow take over the prison he was put in, which Snively could never do. Not to mention, he had that epic moment where he got all the way to the Chaos Chamber with the Dracon Empire. I hope he takes a long time to revive Eggman because I'm enjoying my break from this guy. It opens up the door to much more creative and less predictable plots because Sonic has new villains to fight instead of just Eggman sending Badniks and Robot Troopers 6 million times. Because they're minor villains, they're actually allowed to be satisfyingly defeated at the end of the story they show up in. They're actually allowed to send them to jail. So there's actually a satisfying conclusion after you see the story that they're in. Whereas Archie was never able to allow Moggle to forever stay in prison. It was never allowed to let Eggman forever be defeated because they're major villains. So that's the good thing about minor villains. Archie really needed to have much more minor villains going around like Fleaway did, because at least then you would feel some sort of that the villains were getting some sort of satisfying victories to kind of make up for the fact that they would never be allowed to get any permanent victories against the major villains. Instead, it was all bleakness at the end of the comic. The second story by Lou Stringer is about Amy and Techno being sent thousands of years into the future of Mobius, which is a happy future, which is very reassuring. Oddly, one that makes no sense since it has all the cars being invisible, with people agreeing to wear lenses to see them. When, why can't you just make them visible in the first place then? What's the point of making them invisible? It has an interesting concept where people eat food with nanobots to gain knowledge easier. When a villain that's siphoning energy from the city tries to take over the world, Amy and Techno defeat him with a catapult from the museum that was fortunately nearby, and they're able to find him because I guess he stood in the same place laughing maniacally the whole time they were gone, doing nothing, rather than leaving and forcing them to run around the whole city pulling a catapult behind them. It's nice to see that Mobius has a good future. And the third story by Lou Stringer is Tails Bites Back, a totally misleading name because he doesn't bite, the downtrodden flea people do, which lets him win against an Eggman fanboy trying to get people to lose faith in the heroes. Won't they just lose faith in Tails instead? If anything, since you'd think people would just feel sorry for him, not lose faith in them entirely. Also, you'd think that the Blue Panther would appreciate that the heroes are taking down criminals. It doesn't make any sense that in a world where every other race of Mobians seems to have equal rights perfectly fine, the insect people are the exception. Penders never had to be the case for the Fire Ant people. They were respected enough that they even got to be advisors to the kindergartens. Unnecessarily.